My mom kicked me out of her birthday celebration for not giving the lavish gift she demanded. So, I took back the house deposit she never even knew existed. Can you imagine being thrown out of your own mother's 50th birthday party? Not just disinvited but escorted out by security. Because the handmade gift you poured your heart into wasn't expensive enough? That was my reality. And what happened next? Well, let me tell you, that's when things got really wild. My mom, Eleanor, had been dropping hints for weeks leading up to her big 5-0. Designer handbags, spa weekends like her friend Carol got, cruises like Brenda's daughter bought. 50th only happen once, right? Except she seemed to forget I was working 2 jobs just to keep a roof over my head and pay off my student loans. She didn't notice, or maybe she just didn't care. Growing up, Eleanor made birthdays special but never extravagant. Box mix cakes, dinner at Olive Garden for a big milestone. That all changed 3 years ago when she started at this wealth management firm. Suddenly, she was surrounded by opulence and she wanted that life. She started shopping at places she couldn't afford, putting on airs about wines she couldn't even pronounce. That's a lot. For her birthday, I decided to give her something truly meaningful. I spent 2 solid weeks crafting her this photo album. A handmade leather cover I tooled myself after taking classes at the community center. Inside, I'd restored old family photos, some from when her parents were young, found them tucked away in Grandpa Arthur's attic. I tracked down pictures from her college days, her wedding, every single important moment. Each page had these little handwritten stories from people who loved her. I got her childhood best friend, Sophia, to write about their first day of school. Her brother wrote about teaching her to drive. 60 hours. That's how long it took. The party was at this ridiculously fancy country club her boss let her use. I showed up in my best dress, Target but clean and pressed. Everyone else looked like they'd stepped straight off a magazine cover. Eleanor was holding court, showing off the gold watch my brother Leo sent from California and the diamond earrings my sister Clara shipped from New York. They couldn't make it, but they certainly had money to burn. Then it was my turn. The whole room watched. Eleanor opened it and her face just fell. She flipped through a couple of pages, then slammed it shut. "Are you serious?" she asked. My heart sank. I said yes, explaining how long it took. She stood up right there in front of everyone and declared, "I can't believe you'd embarrass me like this in front of my colleagues." She said a kindergartner could have made a photo book, that I was basically spitting in her face by showing up with trash. Her boss tried to interject. "It looks thoughtful, Eleanor." But Mom cut her off. She told me to leave. "Take your cheap gift with you," she said. Cheap. She actually used that word about something I'd handmade with love. Her coworkers just stared at their drinks while Marcus, the security guard, walked me out. He whispered, "I think it's beautiful, kid," as we passed the opulent chandeliers. I cried the whole drive home. But here's what Eleanor didn't know. 6 months prior, Grandpa Arthur had called me. He was updating his will and he wanted me to know about an account he'd set up. 20 years ago, he started putting money aside for each grandkid to buy a house. He didn't trust my mom with financial stuff because she'd blown through Grandma's inheritance in 6 months on clothes and trips. So he made me the administrator. Leo and Clara each had $40,000. Mine had $40,000. But there was also one for Eleanor, $50,000, that she was supposed to get when he died, which he figured would be soon given his heart problems. Grandpa made me promise to be smart about when I gave it to her. After the party, I called Grandpa and told him everything. He wasn't surprised. He said Eleanor had always been materialistic, but it got worse when she started comparing herself to others. He asked what I wanted to do about the money. I said I wanted to return it to him. Clearly, Eleanor only cared about expensive things. He said that was my call as administrator. So I did. I transferred all $50,000 back to Grandpa's account. He used it to prepay for a nice assisted living place near his friend Walter. Eleanor knew none of this. Not until Grandpa Arthur had a heart attack 2 weeks after her party. He survived, thankfully, but it scared everyone. Eleanor, bless her heart, started talking about his will at the hospital, while he was still hooked up to oxygen. She kept asking about her inheritance. Had he updated everything? Grandpa, with a weak but steady voice, said everything was taken care of. When he got out, he called a family meeting. He told everyone about the house accounts and that I was in charge of distributing them. Leo and Claire were thrilled. Then Eleanor asked about hers. Grandpa said she didn't have one anymore. She asked what that meant. I took a deep breath. "After you threw me out of your party for giving you a handmade gift," I explained, "I returned your deposit to Grandpa. Since you only valued money, I figured you should probably earn $50,000 first if you wanted it." Her face. It went through 10 different expressions. Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. The color drained from her face before rushing back as bright red splotches on her cheeks. She looked at me, then at Grandpa, then at Leo and Clara. I watched her trying to find words that wouldn't come. The oxygen machine kept up its steady rhythm in the background while the rest of us sat frozen. Her hands gripped the arms of her chair so tight her knuckles went white. She looked like someone had slapped her across the face with the truth, and she couldn't decide whether to cry or scream. Leo leaned forward, rubbing his face. Okay, he said, someone needs to start from the beginning. I'm completely lost. I explained how Grandpa had called me 6 months ago about updating his will, how he'd been setting money aside for 20 years, bits here and there until each account had grown. I told them about the $40,000 for each of us kids, and the $50,000 that was supposed to be for Eleanor when Grandpa died. Leo's eyes got wider with every detail. Clara sat perfectly still, mouth agape. I explained that Grandpa made me the administrator because Mom had blown through Grandma's inheritance in 6 months on clothes and trips she couldn't really afford. He didn't trust her with financial decisions. He wanted someone responsible in charge. Eleanor finally found her voice. Came out sharp loud. Why wasn't I told about this account? She demanded. Why was I kept in the dark about my own money while everyone else knew? Her face flushed darker, and I could see the embarrassment spreading as she realized my siblings were hearing all of this for the first time too. Grandpa's voice cut through the room, weak but steady. I didn't tell you, he said, because I didn't trust you to save it. And the last 3 years watching you chase after rich people and pretend to be someone you're not, it proved I was right not to trust you. Eleanor opened her mouth to argue, but Grandpa held up one hand and she actually stopped talking. Clara turned to me, confusion all over her face. What did Mom do that was bad enough to lose $50,000? I took a breath and told them everything about the birthday party. How I'd spent 2 weeks, the leather cover I tooled myself. How I'd restored old family photos from Grandpa's attic, tracked down pictures from her college years, her wedding. How I'd gotten people to write stories, 60 hours putting it together. My voice shook describing opening the gift at the country club, Eleanor's face falling, her standing up and saying a kindergartner could have made it. The word trash coming out of her mouth about something I'd made with love. Marcus walking me out while her coworkers stared at their drinks. Eleanor kept her eyes on her hands in her lap the whole time I talked. Her shoulders hunched forward like she was trying to make herself smaller. I embarrassed her. Eleanor's voice came out, defensive and too loud. With a cheap gift. After I'd been dropping hints for weeks. Everyone else brought real presents. I showed up with a craft project. Grandpa cut her off. His voice had more strength than I'd heard since the heart attack. 60 hours of handmade work restoring family memories is not cheap. It's worth more than any store-bought thing. You threw away something priceless because you cared more about what your rich coworkers thought than about your own daughter. Eleanor's face crumpled. For a second I thought she might actually understand. Leo cleared his throat. I feel terrible about this whole thing, he admitted. He said he'd sent an expensive gold watch because it was easy and he was too busy to fly home. If I'd known what happened at the party, I would have called Mom immediately and told her she was wrong. Clara nodded. Same with the diamond earrings. I threw money at the problem instead of actually showing up. If I'd been there, I would have stood up for you. When Eleanor had called my gift trash, they both looked at her with something between anger and disappointment. Her face went from red to pale and back to red again. Someone knocked on the door. A woman in scrubs poked her head in. Is everything okay? She asked. Elaine, the hospital social worker. The nursing staff can hear you all the way down the hall. Do you need help with family issues? The room went quiet, save for Grandpa's oxygen machine. Elaine offered to arrange a family mediator. Leo said that might be good, but maybe we should wait until Grandpa was out of the hospital. Everyone nodded. Elaine left her card. We agreed to table the conversation for now. But when we filed out of the hospital room 20 minutes later, the tension came with us like a heavy weight. Nobody said goodbye in the parking lot. We just got into our separate cars and drove away. I replayed Eleanor's face the whole drive home. The shock about the money. The embarrassment when my siblings heard what she'd done. The way she tried to defend herself and got shut down by Grandpa. I couldn't tell if I felt good about what happened or just tired. My phone buzzed at a red light. It was Chloe asking how the family meeting went. I realized I needed to talk to someone who wasn't related to me before my head exploded. I texted back asking if she could meet me at the diner near my apartment. Chloe was already in a booth when I got there. She'd ordered coffee for both of us and a basket of fries. I slid into the seat across from her and the whole story just came pouring out. The hospital room, Grandpa's oxygen machine, Eleanor's face going through 10 emotions. My siblings finding out about the house accounts for the first time. The social worker. Chloe listened without interrupting, eating fries while I talked. When I finally finished, she said I wasn't wrong for what I did. But she pointed out I wasn't feeling as good about it as I probably expected to. She said that meant I needed to figure out what I actually wanted from this whole situation. I picked at the fries and admitted something I hadn't wanted to say out loud. Part of me wanted Mom to hurt the way she hurt me. I wanted her to feel embarrassed and small like I felt when security walked me out. But now that she's actually facing real consequences, I feel guilty for enjoying it. Chloe reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Consequences and cruelty aren't the same thing, she said gently. Eleanor made her choices, knowing full well you worked 2 jobs and couldn't afford designer bags. She chose to value expensive gifts over thoughtful ones. She chose to care more about impressing her colleagues than about her own daughter's feelings. Those were her decisions and now she has to live with the results. You didn't do anything cruel. You just stopped protecting Eleanor from the truth about herself. I walked into my apartment and barely got my shoes off before exhaustion hit me like a wall. The conversation with Chloe helped, but my brain kept replaying Eleanor's face at the hospital and the way my siblings looked at me when they learned about the money. I fell asleep in my clothes on top of the covers. I didn't wake up until someone knocked on my door the next morning. I stumbled over, looked through the peephole and saw Lily standing there with a covered dish. I opened the door and she smiled with that kind expression she always had. She held out the casserole. I made extra, she said, and thought you might need a home-cooked meal. I thanked her and took the dish, which was still warm. She asked if everything was okay, noticing I looked stressed lately. I started to say I was fine, but then my eyes filled with tears and the whole story came out right there in my doorway. Lily listened without interrupting while I told her about the party, the album, the money, the hospital confrontation. When I finished, she squeezed my shoulder. She said she could let me pay rent a few days late this month if family stuff was affecting my work hours. I told her I should be okay but thanked her for the offer. She said the offer stood if I needed it and to come knock on her door if I wanted to talk. After she left, I sat on my couch with the casserole and cried again, but this time it felt different. I'd been so focused on Eleanor's rejection that I hadn't noticed all the people around me who actually cared. Chloe listening to me vent at the diner. Marcus whispering my album was beautiful. And now Lily offering to help with rent without me even asking. These people valued relationships and kindness. While Eleanor had spent 3 years chasing money and status, my phone rang. It was Grandpa Arthur. I answered and he asked if I could come to the hospital. He needed some documents from his house. He gave me specific instructions about where to find his will and some financial papers in his home office. I drove to his house and used the spare key he kept under the fake rock by his front door. Inside, everything looked the same, comfortable and lived in. Nothing fancy but filled with memories. I found the papers in his desk, exactly where he said they'd be, and drove them to the hospital. Grandpa was sitting up in bed looking better than the day before. More color in his face, fewer tubes. I handed him the documents and he thanked me, then patted the chair next to his bed. He said he'd been thinking about how to handle this whole situation without destroying what was left of our family. I sat down and waited. He explained that he wasn't changing his will or the house accounts. Everything would stay exactly as we'd discussed. But he wanted me to understand why he'd set things up the way he did. Eleanor had always been the child who needed other people's approval to feel good about herself. She measured her worth by what others thought of her instead of having confidence in who she actually was. He'd hoped she would grow out of it, but the wealth management job made everything worse. Being surrounded by rich people every day fed that need for external validation until she couldn't see anything else. I asked him if he thought I did the right thing by returning her money. Grandpa looked at me for a long moment. "I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself," he said. "But I also warn you, pride in being right can become its own trap." He asked if I'd return the money because it was the right thing to do, or because I wanted to punish Eleanor. I opened my mouth to say it was the right thing but stopped. I wasn't entirely sure anymore. Part of me had wanted her to hurt the way she hurt me. Part of me had wanted her to feel small and embarrassed like I felt when security walked me out. Grandpa nodded like he knew what I was thinking. He said the money was mine to control and he supported whatever I decided, but I needed to be honest with myself about my motivations. I left the hospital feeling more confused than when I'd arrived. The next few days passed in a blur of work shifts and ignored phone calls. Eleanor kept calling and I kept sending her to voicemail. The messages started angry, demanding an explanation for why I'd humiliated her. Then they shifted to tearful apologies, saying she was sorry for how she acted at the party. The latest ones threatened me about family loyalty and how I was tearing everyone apart. I deleted them without listening all the way through. Leo and Clara created a group chat without Eleanor to discuss what happened next. Leo understood why I did what I did, but thought maybe I should have warned Mom privately instead of announcing it at the hospital. Clara disagreed, saying Mom needed to face consequences. They went back and forth for hours and I mostly stayed quiet because I didn't know whose side I was on anymore. Neither of them seemed sure either. My phone rang while I was restocking shelves at my second job. It was Arthur, our lawyer. I stepped into the back room to take the call. He said he wanted to update me on the assisted living facility where Grandpa had put down a deposit using Eleanor's $50,000. The place was really nice with a community garden and activities room, and it was only 15 minutes from Walter's place. Grandpa seemed genuinely excited about the move, talking about all the things he and Walter could do together. Arthur said Grandpa was scheduled to move in next month once he finished recovering from the heart attack. Hearing that Grandpa was happy about his new place made me feel better about the whole situation, even though the family drama was still a mess. I thanked Arthur for the update and went back to work. 3 days after the hospital confrontation, someone knocked on my apartment door around 8 p.m. I looked through the peephole and saw Eleanor standing there. My first thought was to pretend I wasn't home, but something about how she looked made me stop. She was wearing regular jeans and a plain sweater, nothing designer or expensive looking. Her face was bare of the heavy makeup she usually wore, and I could see she'd been crying. I opened the door and we stared at each other for a few seconds. She asked if she could come in. I stepped aside and let her pass. We sat on opposite ends of my couch in silence that stretched so long it became uncomfortable. Finally, Eleanor asked if I still had the photo album. I told her I did, that it was in my closet because I couldn't bring myself to throw away 60 hours of work. Even after she called it trash. She flinched when I said the word trash. She asked if she could see it. My hands shook as I walked to my closet and pulled the album from the top shelf where I'd shoved it 3 weeks ago. I handed it to her and sat back down. This time she opened it slowly, actually looking at each page instead of flipping through quickly. She read the story Sophia wrote about their first day of school. She studied the restored photos of her parents when they were young that I'd found in Grandpa's attic. She traced her finger over the picture from her wedding and the one of her holding Leo as a baby. Tears rolled down her face as she turned each page and read every single story I'd collected. When she finished, she closed the album carefully and held it against her chest. She said it was beautiful. He was sorry. She admitted she'd been so focused on what her colleagues would think at the party that she didn't even look at it properly. She'd just seen homemade, and panicked about seeming poor in front of people she worked with. She'd been trying to keep up with people who made 3 times her salary, buying things on credit she couldn't afford, and she was exhausted from pretending to be someone she wasn't. I sat there holding the album she just handed back to me and felt everything at once. Part of me wanted to hug her and say it was okay that we could move past this and start over. But I couldn't stop seeing myself in that country club ballroom, everyone staring while Marcus walked me to the door. I couldn't unhear the word trash coming out of her mouth about something I'd spent 60 hours making. I told her I appreciated her being honest now, that it meant something that she came here and said all this. But you humiliated me in front of all those people, I said, my voice tight. You called my work garbage. I can't just pretend that didn't happen because you finally decided to be real about your problems. Eleanor's face crumpled a little, but she nodded. She said she understood if I couldn't forgive her right away. She wanted me to know she was going to make changes, real ones this time. She'd been living beyond her means for years, buying things she couldn't afford to impress people who probably didn't even notice. Losing the house deposit she didn't know about was forcing her to face reality about her money and what actually mattered. She stood up to leave and I walked her to the door. We didn't hug or make plans to see each other. She just left and I closed the door behind her, standing there for a minute trying to figure out what I felt. I picked up my phone and called Clara. She answered on the second ring and I told her about Eleanor showing up at my apartment. Clara got quiet for a second, then admitted Eleanor had called her too earlier that day. She'd apologized for always comparing their gifts and making her feel like money was the only thing that mattered. Clara said she wanted to believe Eleanor meant it this time, but she'd heard promises before that didn't stick. Still, something about this felt different. Maybe because Eleanor was actually facing real consequences instead of just feeling bad for a few days. We talked for almost an hour about whether we should give her another chance or keep our distance until she proved she'd really changed. Leo called me the next morning. He'd heard from Clara about Eleanor's apology to her and he had thoughts. He pointed out that Eleanor had made promises before and fallen back into old patterns within weeks. She'd say she was going to budget better or stop buying expensive things. Then a month later she'd show up with new designer shoes. He thought losing $50,000 might be the wake-up call she needed, but he wasn't ready to trust her completely until he saw real change over time, not just words and tears. I understood where he was coming from. I felt the same way. 2 days later, I got a call from Arthur, saying Grandpa was released from the hospital. The doctors gave him strict orders to reduce stress, take his heart medicine and follow up with his cardiologist, Dr. Evans, in 2 weeks. I drove to the hospital to pick him up and take him to see the assisted living facility where he'd put down the deposit using Eleanor's $50,000. The place was nice, way nicer than I expected. It had a big community garden where residents grew vegetables and flowers. There was an activities room with a pool table and a library. The dining hall served 3 meals a day and the staff seemed friendly. Grandpa walked through slowly, still recovering, but I could see him getting more excited with each room we visited. He kept talking about how Walter's place was only 15 minutes away, and they could finally play cards whenever they wanted without worrying about driving at night. Arthur showed us the apartment Grandpa would move into next month. It had a small kitchen, a bedroom, and a living room with big windows that looked out at the garden. Grandpa sat down in the chair by the window and smiled bigger than I'd seen him smile in months. Watching him that happy made all the family drama feel worth it. In the common area on our way out, Grandpa introduced me to some of the other residents playing cards. He told them I was his granddaughter, the one who made sure he could afford this place. The way he said it with so much pride in his voice made my throat tight. One of the women said I must be a wonderful granddaughter, and Grandpa agreed without hesitation. That pride he had in me helped push back against the guilt I'd been feeling about Eleanor. I realized I could feel good about helping Grandpa get somewhere safe and comfortable without feeling good about the fact that it hurt Eleanor. Those were two separate things. I didn't have to tie them together. A week after Grandpa's release, Eleanor called me. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. She told me she'd met with a financial counselor at her bank and created a realistic budget for the first time in years. She was cutting up her store credit cards, all of them. She was selling some of her designer items to pay down debt. Her voice shook when she talked about it, like she was scared, but also relieved to finally be honest about money instead of pretending everything was fine. I didn't know what to say, so I just told her that sounded like a good start. At work the next day, Chloe asked if I was going to give Eleanor another chance. We were on break and I'd been quiet all morning. I explained that I wasn't ready to go back to how things were before the party, but I was willing to see if Eleanor actually followed through on what she said. Trust isn't something you rebuild with one conversation and some tears, I told her. It takes time and consistent actions. Mom has to prove she's serious about changing. Chloe nodded. That seems fair, she said. You don't owe her anything, but if she's really trying, then maybe there's hope. That evening, Claire called with an idea. She suggested we all meet for dinner at Olive Garden. The place Eleanor used to take us for special occasions when we were kids, before she started trying to keep up with wealthy people. The suggestion made me smile. I hadn't thought about those dinners in years. Birthdays, good report cards, any excuse for breadsticks and pasta. Clara said it would be neutral territory, not anyone's home, and maybe the nostalgia would help us start rebuilding without so much pressure. I agreed it was worth trying. We set a date for the following Saturday. Clara said she'd tell Eleanor and Leo. Saturday came and I drove to the Olive Garden near the mall. Eleanor was already there when I arrived, sitting in the waiting area looking uncomfortable. Clara and Leo showed up a few minutes later and we got seated at a table in the back. It was awkward at first. Eleanor kept fidgeting with her napkin and nobody seemed to know what to say. You could tell she felt weird being back at a chain restaurant after years of acting like she was too good for places like this. But then the waiter brought out the breadsticks and Leo grabbed one, making a joke about how these were better than anything at Mom's fancy country club party. Eleanor looked surprised for a second. Then she actually laughed. Not a big laugh, but it was real and it broke some of the tension. We spent the rest of dinner talking about birthdays from when we were little. Eleanor told this story about my 5th birthday when I wanted a princess cake, but she accidentally made it look like a monster instead. She laughed telling it, a real laugh that reminded me of before the wealth management job changed everything. Clara brought up the time Mom took us to Olive Garden after her first piano recital and let us order whatever we wanted. Leo remembered his 8th birthday when Mom organized a scavenger hunt around our old neighborhood with prizes hidden at each house. The stories kept coming and I noticed Eleanor's shoulders relaxing more with each memory. She looked comfortable in this chain restaurant for the first time in years, not worried about who might see her here or what they'd think. The waiter brought more breadsticks and Eleanor grabbed one without hesitation. No pretense about carbs or expensive diets. She asked if we remembered the time she drove us all to the beach for Clara's birthday and got lost for 3 hours. We laughed about Dad calling every gas station along the coast trying to find us. These were the moments I'd forgotten while being angry about the party and the humiliation. Mom used to be fun. Used to prioritize making memories over looking impressive. Watching her tell these stories, I saw glimpses of that person underneath all the designer clothes and status seeking. After we finished eating and split the check, Eleanor asked if she could talk to me alone in the parking lot. My siblings headed to their cars while Eleanor and I stood under the yellow lights. She looked nervous, fidgeting with her purse strapped the way she used to when I was a kid, when she had something important to say. She told me she'd scheduled an appointment with a financial counselor at her bank, Rebecca, and asked if I'd be willing to come with her. She wanted me to understand the changes she was making and have someone to hold her accountable beyond just her own promises. The request surprised me. The old Eleanor would never admit she needed help, especially not in front of her kids. I could see this was hard for her, asking me to witness her financial mess after years of pretending everything was perfect. She said she knew I had every right to refuse after what she did at the party, but she was trying to be honest about where she stood instead of hiding behind expensive purchases and fake confidence. I agreed to attend one meeting with the counselor. I made it clear I wasn't taking responsibility for fixing her finances or managing her money, but I'd support her efforts to change if she was serious about it. Eleanor nodded and accepted the boundary without arguing or making excuses. The old Eleanor would have gotten defensive, would have said I was being unsupportive or cruel. This version just thanked me quietly and said she understood. We set a date for the following Tuesday at her bank's downtown branch. She hugged me before getting in her car. A quick, awkward hug that felt genuine instead of performative. I watched her drive away in the least luxury sedan she couldn't afford, wondering if she'd actually follow through or if this was just another moment of temporary clarity that would fade when the shame wore off. Tuesday came faster than I expected. I met Eleanor at the bank at 4:30 p.m. after finishing my shift. Rebecca's office was small with generic motivational posters and a desk covered in folders. Eleanor had already spread out her financial documents, credit card statements, loan papers, receipts from purchases she'd made over the past 3 years. Rebecca, a middle-aged woman, got straight to business. She walked us through Eleanor's debt, starting with the credit cards. 5 different cards, all maxed out, totaling over $30,000 in clothes, accessories, restaurant meals. The car lease ate $800 a month for a vehicle worth more than Eleanor's annual salary. Her townhouse rental cost $2,400 a month, exactly half of what she made after taxes. Rebecca had created a 5-year plan to get Eleanor stable. But it required major changes. Selling the designer items to pay down high-interest debt, breaking the car lease and buying something used and reliable, moving to a cheaper apartment. No more shopping at stores she couldn't afford. No more pretending to be wealthy when she was drowning in debt. Eleanor sat there looking at the numbers on Rebecca's screen and admitted something I'd never heard her say before. She told us she was terrified of turning 50 and being seen as old and irrelevant. The women at her wealth management firm were all younger or wealthier or both, and she felt like she had to compete with designer bags and expensive jewelry just to matter. She said she spent 3 years trying to look successful enough that people would respect her, but all she did was bury herself in debt while pushing away the people who actually cared about her. Her voice shook. I realized this was the first time she'd been honest about why she acted the way she did. Rebecca listened without judgment and asked Eleanor what she valued more: the approval of colleagues who didn't know her, or the relationships with family who loved her regardless of what she wore or drove. I understood Eleanor's insecurity better after hearing this explanation. Turning 50 in an office full of younger women with trust funds and wealthy husbands must have felt terrible. But I also pointed out that she threw away a daughter who loved her while chasing approval from colleagues who probably didn't even remember what gift she got at her birthday party. I said she had security escort me out over a handmade album that took 60 hours to create because she cared more about looking impressive than being loved. Rebecca nodded. This is exactly the pattern we need to address, she said. The difference between external validation and internal worth. She asked Eleanor if she was ready to make real changes or if she just wanted to feel better temporarily. Eleanor said she was ready. Losing the house deposit she didn't know about was the wake-up call she needed to stop pretending and start being honest about where she stood financially and emotionally. Over the next month, I watched Eleanor actually follow through on her promises. She moved to a smaller apartment in a less expensive part of town, a 1-bedroom place that cost $1,400 instead of $2,400. She broke her car lease and bought a used Honda with cash from selling some of her designer items. The social media posts about expensive outings and luxury purchases stopped completely. Instead, she posted pictures of walks in the park and books she was reading from the library. Clara called to tell me Eleanor had apologized for always comparing their gifts and making her feel like money was the only thing that mattered. Leo mentioned that Eleanor seemed different when they talked on the phone, less focused on status and more interested in how he was actually doing. I stayed cautious because people can seem changed for a few weeks and then slide back into old patterns. But the consistency surprised me. Every time I expected Eleanor to crack and go shopping or complain about her downgrade in lifestyle, she didn't. Leo flew in from California to visit Grandpa and stayed with me for a few days. We took Eleanor to lunch and he commented on how different she seemed, more relaxed, even though she was clearly stressed about money and adjusting to her new budget. She wore regular clothes from Target and drove her used Honda without apologizing for either. We decided to take her to the community center where I learned leather tooling, the same place she used to drop me off for art classes when I was in middle school. Eleanor walked around looking at the different workshops they offered: pottery, painting, woodworking. She signed up for a pottery class on Thursday evenings, something she said she'd always wanted to try, but thought was too basic for someone at her level. Leo raised his eyebrows at me when she said that, acknowledging that the old Eleanor would never admit to wanting something basic or sign up for a class at a community center instead of some expensive studio. Grandpa settled into his assisted living facility near Walter and invited all of us for dinner in the community dining room. The place was nice, not fancy but clean and comfortable, with residents who seemed genuinely happy. Eleanor showed up in jeans and a sweater. No designer labels or expensive jewelry. Just regular clothes that fit her actual life instead of the life she pretended to have. I watched her interact with the other residents at Grandpa's table, asking about their families and hobbies without any pretense or status seeking. She helped an older woman reach the salt shaker and laughed at another resident's joke about the mystery meat they served on Tuesdays. This was the mom I remembered from childhood, the one who was friendly and genuine instead of worried about impressing people. Grandpa caught my eye across the table and smiled. I knew he saw it too. The person she used to be, coming back now that the wealth obsession wasn't controlling her anymore. Clara called with news that made everyone excited. She was pregnant, due in 7 months, and wanted to tell the family before announcing it publicly. Eleanor's reaction was pure joy. No mention of expensive baby gifts or designer nursery items. She asked about Clara's health, how she was feeling, if she needed anything practical like help with doctor appointments. She offered to come visit when the baby arrived and help with childcare instead of throwing money at the situation. Clara started crying on the phone, happy tears, and told Eleanor she was grateful to have her real mother back instead of the person who only cared about expensive things. Eleanor cried too, apologizing again for the years she spent chasing status instead of being present for her kids. After the call ended, Eleanor texted me, asking if I thought she could ever make up for the damage she'd caused. I told her she couldn't erase the past, but she could build a better future if she kept following through on her promises. Eleanor hosted dinner at her new apartment the following Saturday. The place was smaller than her old townhouse, with furniture from regular stores instead of designer showrooms. I walked in carrying the photo album I'd made for her birthday, the one she'd rejected at the country club party. She'd asked me to bring it during our last phone call, her voice quiet and hopeful in a way I wasn't used to hearing. The album sat on her coffee table when I arrived, positioned like something precious instead of trash. Eleanor opened it while Leo and Clara watched from the couch, turning pages slowly and pointing out photos to everyone. She explained how she'd been adding her own stories to the blank pages I'd left, writing about memories with each of us kids in the margins next to the restored pictures. Her handwriting filled spaces around photos of our childhood birthdays and family vacations. Stories about teaching me to ride a bike and helping Claire with homework. She looked at me while closing the album and said she read through it every week, that it reminded her of who she used to be before she got lost trying to impress people who didn't matter. Leo glanced at me with raised eyebrows, acknowledging this version of Eleanor who admitted to being lost instead of pretending everything was perfect. After dinner, Eleanor cleared the dishes and asked if we could talk privately in her bedroom. She sat on the edge of her bed, hands folded in her lap like a kid waiting to confess something bad. She told me she'd been seeing a therapist for 3 months, working through why she became so obsessed with material things and status symbols. Her therapist helped her understand that losing her own mother when she was 30 made her terrified of aging and dying. And she tried to control those fears by controlling how others saw her success. If people thought she was wealthy and important, maybe that meant she mattered and wouldn't be forgotten when she was gone. She cried while explaining this, mascara running down her cheeks, black streaks she didn't bother to wipe away. I sat next to her on the bed and admitted I'd been in therapy too, dealing with the hurt of being publicly rejected by my mother and the guilt of taking away her house money. My therapist helped me see that both things could be true at the same time, that I was justified in my actions and I still felt bad about the pain they caused. Eleanor reached for my hand and squeezed it, not saying anything for a long moment, just holding on like she was afraid I might disappear. We rejoined my siblings in the living room and spent the rest of the evening looking through old photo albums Eleanor had stored in boxes, laughing at pictures of us with bad haircuts and questionable fashion choices from the 90s. Grandpa had his 3-month checkup with Dr. Evans the following Tuesday. I drove him to the appointment at the medical building near his assisted living facility, parking in the lot where other elderly residents shuffled toward the entrance with walkers and canes. Dr. Evans called Grandpa back after 20 minutes in the waiting room, leading us to an exam room with anatomy posters on the walls and a blood pressure cuff hanging from a hook. He ran through the standard tests, checking Grandpa's heart rate and blood pressure, listening to his chest with a stethoscope while Grandpa sat very still on the paper-covered exam table. Dr. Evans pulled up Grandpa's chart on the computer and studied the numbers, nodding to himself before turning to face us. He said Grandpa's heart was stronger than it had been in years, that the stress reduction from moving into assisted living was clearly helping his recovery. Grandpa laughed and said losing $50,000 was the best investment in his health he ever made, which made Dr. Evans smile in confusion until Grandpa waved off the explanation. Eleanor was waiting in the lobby when we finished, having driven over to hear the results herself. She smiled when I told her the good news, but the expression looked pained, like she was happy for Grandpa, but hurt about being the $50,000 joke. We walked Grandpa back to his facility and stayed for lunch in the community dining room, where residents asked about his doctor visit and congratulated him on his improved health. Eleanor helped an older woman reach the salt shaker without being asked, a small gesture the old version of her would have ignored while checking her phone. The next Saturday, Eleanor called and asked if I would teach her leather tooling so we could make a photo album together for Clara's baby. The request caught me off guard. The old Eleanor would never ask to learn something from me. Would never admit she wanted to create something handmade instead of buying something expensive. I agreed, and we met at the community center that afternoon, the same place where I'd learned to tool the leather cover for her birthday album. The instructor recognized me and set us up at a workbench with tools and leather scraps to practice on. Eleanor struggled with the swivel knife at first, pressing too hard and creating jagged lines instead of smooth curves. I showed her how to hold it at the right angle, how to let the blade do the work instead of forcing it. We spent 3 hours that first session just practicing basic cuts and stamps, Eleanor's fingers cramping from the unfamiliar movements. She didn't complain or suggest we just buy something instead. Just kept working until her lines started looking cleaner. We agreed to meet every Saturday afternoon to work on the album together, a project that would take weeks of patience and care instead of a quick swipe of a credit card. During our second tooling session, Eleanor opened up about how isolated she'd felt trying to maintain her wealthy appearance. She'd stopped calling old friends like Sophia because she was embarrassed they'd see through her pretense, that they'd know she couldn't actually afford the lifestyle she was pretending to have. She'd built her whole life around impressing her colleagues at the wealth management firm, people who probably didn't think about her at all outside of work. She admitted she'd spent thousands of dollars on clothes and accessories to wear to company events, then returned most of them the next week because she couldn't actually pay the credit card bills. The constant performance exhausted her, always worried someone would discover she was faking everything. I listened while stamping a border pattern into the leather, letting her talk without interrupting or judging. She said therapy was helping her understand why she needed external validation so desperately. But knowing the reason didn't make changing the behavior any easier. We finished our session and walked to the parking lot together, Eleanor carrying the leather piece we'd been working on, wrapped in brown paper like something valuable. The following weekend, I invited Eleanor to meet Chloe and Lily for coffee at the diner near my apartment. Chloe had been asking to meet her ever since I'd started talking about Eleanor's changes, curious about the woman who'd had security escort me out of her birthday party. Eleanor arrived in jeans and a sweater from Target. No designer labels or expensive jewelry visible anywhere. She shook hands with Chloe and Lily, asking about their work and lives with what seemed like genuine interest instead of the fake politeness she used to perform. Chloe told stories about her job at the call center, and Eleanor laughed at the right moments, not checking her phone or looking around to see if anyone more important had entered the diner. Lily mentioned being my landlord, and Eleanor thanked her for being flexible with me during family difficulties. A simple interaction the old Eleanor would have dismissed as beneath her attention. Watching Eleanor engage with people who valued kindness over status showed me how much she'd actually changed. That this wasn't just temporary behavior to get back in my good graces. After they left, Eleanor asked if those were the kind of friends she should have been making all along instead of chasing approval from wealthy colleagues. I told her yes, that real friendships were built on who you are instead of what you own. Leo called Tuesday evening with news about his house account. He decided to transfer the full $40,000 toward a down payment on a condo in California. Finally ready to stop renting and build some equity, he thanked Grandpa for having the foresight to set up the accounts 20 years ago and thanked me for administering them responsibly, making sure the money went where it was supposed to instead of getting lost to poor planning. Clara called the next day with similar news, using her $40,000 for a house in New York now that the baby was coming and they needed more space. She thanked me too, her voice emotional as she talked about how this money would change their lives and give her daughter a stable home. I felt proud helping my siblings reach these milestones even as Eleanor's situation remained unresolved, with no house account waiting for her anymore. Both of them asked how Eleanor was doing, whether she was still making changes or sliding back into old patterns. And I told them honestly that she seemed committed this time, but only time would prove it for sure. Eleanor brought up the house money during our 5th tooling session at the community center. We were working on the album cover for Clara's baby, our hands moving in rhythm as we stamped patterns into the leather. She asked if I thought she'd ever be in a position where Grandpa would trust her with that kind of responsibility again, whether $50,000 was gone forever or if she could somehow earn it back through changed behavior. I set down my stamping tool and looked at her directly, telling her honestly that I didn't know what Grandpa would decide, but I could see she was trying to become someone trustworthy, someone who valued relationships over possessions, and that mattered more than the money itself. She nodded and wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, leaving a smudge of leather dye on her cheek. We kept working in silence for a while, the only sounds coming from our tools hitting leather and other students talking quietly at nearby workbenches. Grandpa Arthur called a family meeting at his assisted living facility 6 months after his heart attack. He'd gathered all of us, including Eleanor, asking everyone to come to the community room on Saturday afternoon. I drove over feeling nervous about what he wanted to say, worried this might be another confrontation about money and trust. But when I arrived, Grandpa was smiling in a way that suggested good news instead of more family drama. Leo had flown in from California and Clara had driven up from the city, both of them looking as uncertain as I felt about why we'd been summoned. Eleanor arrived last, parking her used car and walking in wearing clothes that actually fit her real life instead of some fantasy version she was trying to project. Grandpa cleared his throat and looked at each of us before speaking. He said he'd been thinking about trust and second chances since his heart attack. He pulled out some papers from the folder on his lap and explained he'd opened a new account at his bank. This one had $10,000 in it and it was for Eleanor. My siblings and I exchanged glances while Eleanor went completely still in her chair. Grandpa said this wasn't house money like the rest of us got. This was for her to use however she needed while getting her finances stable. He said the amount was smaller because she had to prove she could handle it responsibly first. Eleanor started crying right there in the community room with other residents walking past. She wasn't making noise, but tears just poured down her face. She told Grandpa she didn't deserve this after everything she'd done. He said that was exactly why he was doing it, because she recognized she'd messed up and was working to change. Eleanor promised through her tears that she wouldn't waste this second chance. She thanked him over and over while Leo handed her tissues from the box on the side table. 2 weeks later, Eleanor called me from her bank parking lot. She said she'd just met with Rebecca, her financial counselor, and followed through on their plan. She'd used $5,000 from Grandpa's gift to pay off her highest interest credit cards. The other $5,000 went into a savings account as her emergency fund. Her voice sounded lighter than I'd heard it in months. She asked if I wanted to see the bank statements, and I said she didn't have to prove anything to me, but she insisted, saying the accountability she'd established was important to keep. We met for coffee that afternoon and she showed me everything on her phone. The credit card balances at zero, the savings account with its $5,000 cushion. She'd even downloaded a budgeting app that tracked every dollar she spent. The photo album we'd been working on together came out beautiful. Eleanor and I spent our final Saturday session at the community center, adding the last decorative touches to the leather cover. Inside, we'd arranged pictures of 4 generations of our family, photos of great-grandparents I'd never met, pictures of Grandpa and Grandma on their wedding day, Eleanor as a little girl with missing front teeth. Each page had stories we'd written together about the people in the photos and what they meant to our family. Clara's baby shower was at a restaurant near her place. When we walked in with the album wrapped in simple brown paper, Clara looked nervous about what kind of gift Eleanor might have brought. We presented it together and Clara opened it slowly. She flipped through the pages, reading the stories and looking at the restored photos. Then she hugged us both at the same time and said this was the best gift she'd ever received. I watched Eleanor's face when Clara said best. A year ago that word would have made her flinch or get defensive. Now she just smiled and squeezed Clara's hand. I closed on my condo 3 months after Grandpa's announcement. The realtor handed me the keys and I stood in my empty living room feeling like I'd accomplished something real. No more rent checks disappearing into someone else's investment. This place was mine. Eleanor showed up to my housewarming party carrying a box wrapped in newspaper. She looked embarrassed as she handed it to me. Inside was a pottery vase she'd made in her community center class. The glaze was uneven and the shape was a little crooked, but I could see the effort she'd put into it. I filled it with flowers from the grocery store and put it right in the center of my kitchen counter where everyone could see it. Leo called me from California with news. He was engaged to his girlfriend of 4 years and they were planning a small wedding at a vineyard near his place. He asked what Eleanor might want for the wedding, probably expecting her to request some expensive outfit or elaborate gift. Eleanor told him she just wanted to be there and be part of the celebration. She said she didn't need anything special, just the chance to see her son get married. Leo called me back after talking to her. He sounded relieved and a little emotional. He said he was grateful to have his real mom back for this important moment. Grandpa called early on a Tuesday morning. His friend, Walter, had passed away in his sleep at the assisted living facility. They'd been friends for 70 years since elementary school. The funeral was small and quiet. Eleanor sat with Grandpa in the front row of the chapel. After the service, she stayed with him in his apartment for hours. I stopped by that evening and found them looking through old photo albums. Grandpa was telling stories about adventures he and Walter had as kids. Eleanor just listened, passing him tissues when he needed them, making tea, being present. She wasn't trying to fix anything or make it better. She was just there. I realized I was watching her practice the kind of emotional support that didn't cost anything but meant everything. The anniversary of Eleanor's 50th birthday party arrived. She texted the family group chat with an invitation to her apartment for cake and coffee. Just immediate family, she said. When we arrived, the apartment smelled like vanilla cake baking. Eleanor had made it herself from a box mix like she used to when we were kids. No fancy bakery, no expensive decorations, just a simple cake with candles and coffee and mismatched mugs. We sat around her small kitchen table and she told us this was the birthday celebration she should have wanted all along. Simple and genuine, surrounded by people who loved her for who she was, not what she could buy or display. Before we left, Eleanor handed me a card. I opened it in my car and found a handwritten letter inside. 3 pages of her apologizing specifically for every hurtful thing she'd said at the country club party. She wrote about calling my gift trash, about having security walk me out, about caring more what her colleagues thought than what her daughter felt. She didn't make excuses or try to justify any of it. She just took full responsibility and thanked me for not giving up on her even when she'd given up on herself. I sat in my car reading it twice before driving home. I called Eleanor the next day. I told her I forgave her and I meant it this time. Not the half-forgiveness I'd felt months ago, where part of me was still angry and hurt. She'd proven through consistent actions over time that she changed. I would never forget being escorted out by security or crying the whole drive home, but I could move forward without that memory being the thing that defined our relationship. Eleanor cried on the phone and thanked me. We talked for an hour about nothing important, just catching up like we used to before everything got complicated. Clara went into labor on a Sunday morning. She called Eleanor first, even before she called her husband, who was at the gym. Eleanor drove to the hospital and stayed through the whole delivery. When my niece was born, healthy and perfect, Clara told the nurses she wanted to name her after our grandmother. I got to the hospital a few hours later and found Eleanor holding the baby in the rocking chair by the window. She was wearing clearance rack clothes and had driven there in her used car. But watching her hold her granddaughter with tears of pure joy on her face, I could see she'd finally found the worth she'd been looking for in all the wrong places. 3 weeks later, Grandpa called another family meeting at the assisted living facility. We all gathered in his apartment, which he decorated with photos from the album I made and some new ones from Clara's baby shower. He had papers spread across his dining table, his reading glasses perched on his nose. He told us he wanted to update his will while everyone was present so there wouldn't be any confusion later. Leo sat on the couch next to Clara, and Eleanor took the chair by the window, her hands folded in her lap. Grandpa walked us through each section, explaining how he was splitting his savings and his house. My siblings and I would each get equal portions of what remained after his assisted living was paid for. Then he got to Eleanor's section. He said her portion would be smaller because of the house money situation, but he wanted to be fair about acknowledging the changes she'd made. Eleanor nodded and said she understood completely. She told Grandpa she was grateful for the $10,000 second chance he'd already given her and didn't expect anything more. Her voice stayed steady, no defensiveness or excuses. Leo reached over and squeezed her hand. After we all signed as witnesses, Grandpa ordered pizza, and we sat around talking about nothing important, just being family without any tension hanging over us. My boss called me into her office on a Tuesday morning 2 weeks later. I'd been working at the marketing firm for 3 years, grinding through projects and taking on extra responsibilities whenever they needed help. She told me they were promoting me to senior coordinator with a significant raise. The new salary meant I could finally quit my weekend retail job and have actual days off. I thanked her and somehow made it back to my desk without crying. The first person I called was Eleanor. She answered on the second ring and I told her the news, my voice shaking with relief and excitement. She screamed so loud I had to pull the phone away from my ear. She said she was so proud of how hard I'd worked and that I deserved every bit of this opportunity. She didn't mention that my new salary still didn't come close to what people at her wealth management firm made. She just kept saying how happy she was that I'd have more time to rest and enjoy my life. We talked for 20 minutes about what I'd do with my free weekends and how good it would feel to sleep in on Saturdays. When I hung up, I sat at my desk staring at my computer screen, feeling like maybe we'd finally turned a corner. The next month, we started new family traditions. Leo suggested monthly dinners at Olive Garden, the place Eleanor used to take us for special occasions before everything got complicated. We picked the first Sunday of every month and made it non-negotiable unless someone was traveling. Eleanor showed up to the first one wearing jeans and a sweater from Target. No designer labels or expensive jewelry. She ordered the same chicken parmigiana she used to get when I was a kid and told stories about bringing us there for good report cards. Clara brought the baby and we passed her around the table while we ate breadsticks and talked about nothing important. After dinner, Eleanor suggested we sign up for community center classes together. She wanted to try the pottery wheel and I wanted to learn more advanced leather tooling techniques. Leo couldn't join from California, but Clara said she'd come when the baby was a bit older. We also committed to visiting Grandpa every other weekend, bringing him lunch and sitting in the community room with him and his friends. Eleanor never missed a visit. She'd bring cookies she baked herself and play cards with the residents. Watching her laugh with Grandpa's neighbor about a terrible hand of gin rummy, I realized she looked more relaxed than she had in years. The constant stress of keeping up appearances had been eating her alive. And now that she'd stopped trying, she could actually breathe. Thanksgiving arrived and I hosted dinner in my new condo for the first time. Leo flew in from California and Clara brought her husband and the baby. Eleanor showed up early to help me cook, wearing an apron I'd never seen before, humming while she peeled potatoes. Grandpa came with Arthur, who'd become a regular part of our family gatherings. We crammed around my small dining table with mismatched chairs I'd collected from thrift stores and yard sales. The turkey was slightly dry and I forgot to make gravy, but nobody cared. We held hands while Grandpa said grace, thanking God for second chances and family that sticks together through hard times. During dinner, I looked around at everyone laughing and passing dishes and arguing about whether stuffing should have raisins. Eleanor sat between my siblings, completely present in the moment, not checking her phone or worrying about what anyone thought. The handmade photo albums sat on my bookshelf next to the pottery vase she'd made in her community center class. Both of them reminders that the best gifts come from time and love rather than price tags. Eleanor wasn't perfect, and our relationship still had complicated moments when old patterns tried to resurface. But she was working on herself consistently, going to therapy every week and sticking to her budget even when it was hard. We were rebuilding trust, one honest conversation at a time, and that felt more valuable than any amount of money Grandpa could have left her. I was glad I'd stood up for that truth, even when it cost us all something to learn. What would you have done in my place? How do you navigate those impossible family situations where trust is broken, but love still lingers? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.